I'm Paul Shard, on board Distant Shores 3 down here in sunny Panama. This time on Distant Shores, we're talking about sailing your boat south to the Bahamas and on to the Caribbean. Cheryl and I have been producing a television show for over 31 years. We produce the Distant Shores TV series, which is on around the world on various television networks, as well as the Distant Shores TV YouTube channel. Our very first boat when we set off in 1989 was a classic 37, which we built ourselves. She was 37 feet long and drew 6 feet. After 18 years of traveling aboard two-step, we sold her in the Mediterranean and bought our first southerly, a shallow draft sailboat, so that we could get back to the Bahamas and explore some of the really shallow areas. She's 42 feet long and only drew 3 feet with the keel up, about 8 feet with the keel down. Our second southerly was called Distant Shores 2, and she was a 49-footer, but still only drew a little over 3 feet. This boat here is a southerly 480 made by Discovery. She's 48 feet long, but only draws a little over 3 feet with the keel up and 10'3" with the keel down, so she's great for the Bahamas. This time we're going to be talking about routes south to the Bahamas and planning a cruise in Caribbean, different cruise options, routes down to the Bahamas, routes on to the Caribbean, and highlights of the different island groups you can get to travel in. Charter cruising is one of the first and best options to get to know and find out if really the cruising lifestyle is for you. We did a couple of charters before we built our first boat, including up in the North Channel in Canada and then down in the British Virgin Islands. And I got to recommend the Virgins as a place to help figure out if you really like the lifestyle and if you have a hesitant mate, to get her turned on to the idea of sailing and living aboard. Charter ownership is another option to get into the sailing lifestyle. In this case, you still have a job, but want to just cruise for a few weeks of every year. You buy a boat which is going to go into charter ownership, and the charter company will be chartering it out, giving you some of the income and using the rest to pay for the mortgage and maintenance of their business. Then you get a few weeks of every year for sailing. Part-time cruising and sabbatical cruising is another way to get into the cruising lifestyle. We've done this for a number of years, where you take either a period of time off, like a number of months or a year or 2 years or so, as a sabbatical and travel around. And full-time live-aboard cruising, you just stay on board the whole time, year in, year out. It's your only home, and you can travel and explore in the Caribbean and Bahamas, and you just have to watch out for hurricane season. If you're anywhere on the east coast of the United States or eastern Canada, you have a great option to go down south via the Intracoastal Waterway. Now, the Intracoastal Waterway heads down the coast of the United States, starting in the Chesapeake Bay, although we took it down through the lakes and the Hudson to New York City, and then from there on down to Florida and across the Straits to the Bahamas. The Great Loop is another way to get down south. This involves the Mississippi, Tennessee, Tom Bigby Waterway, which goes from Detroit and down the Mississippi River onto the Gulf of Mexico. We've not done this trip before, but we've spoken with a number of people who've really enjoyed it. Now, what you can do also is to add these two routes together, and that turns into a big loop, which the Americans call the Great Loop trip. And it's a really nice cruise that would involve one way or the other, clockwise or counterclockwise, basically cutting off a big part of the eastern United States. Once you get down to Florida, you get the next obstacle to cross is the Gulf Stream. Now, we have heard a lot of people say that they have trouble with the Gulf Stream. We have crossed it perhaps 15 or so times, and we've never had a really bad crossing. We've had a few rough crossings, but nothing too terrible. You want to be sure that you don't wind up in a situation where the wind is driving waves down which run against the current of the Gulf Stream. This is a weather map showing winds coming down from the north-northeast, and those would be driving waves, and if the waves get to be 1.5 to 2 meters high, that's not such a big deal, but as soon as those waves get into the Gulf Stream, it becomes much, much rougher, and you definitely don't want to be involved in that kind of thing if the winds are anything like that. Some of the main routes are across from West Palm Beach or from Miami and Fort Lauderdale area across to either Bimini or the Great Abacos Grand Bahama Bank. This is the shortest crossing from Miami across to Bimini, which is barely 50 miles. And then you get over to the Abacos. The Abacos is a wonderful cruising ground in its own right. We have cruised there a couple of times and find they're just super charming, very lovely islands, and we're really looking forward to getting to go back there.
May through October is rainy season in the Bahamas, and it's hot. So we move into the air-conditioned cottage right in the boatyard at Abaco Yacht Services. Green Turtle Key is just 3 miles long and half a mile wide. The island was settled in the late 1700s by Loyalists arriving from the newly formed United States of America. The town was founded in the 1780s. The architecture of the old homes coming with the settlers, mainly from New England, but the small island doesn't leave much room for roads. Narrow roads have developed from paths in New Plymouth. Needless to say, these narrow roads are one-way, barely wide enough for the standard golf cart, which is driven and also available for rent here. If you do rent one, remember they drive on the left in the Bahamas. The town is quiet at this time of year, but there are lots of little shops, boutiques, and restaurants that get busier in late afternoon when the temperature is cooler.
The Abacos and the Bahamas in general are one of the places that you often hear would be best with a shallow draft boat. We did a number of cruises there with our first boat, which drew 6 feet, and we really still had a great time. We really enjoyed the cruising there. There were a lot of places we couldn't go to, but there were many places that we could go to, and we had a great time. So I think you could say shallow draft, certainly 6 feet is quite reasonable to enjoy a really nice cruise in the Bahamas. If the boat starts getting much deeper than 6 feet, then you could get into trouble and find that there's a lot less places you can go to, but it's a really large cruising ground and you can still get out and see quite a lot of stuff even if you draw 7 feet. There's many different areas for cruising, including the Berry Islands, one of the other groups here, that can be cruised with shallow draft or explored by dinghy. The Berries are particularly shallow, and shallow boats will have a lot more places to visit there. Nassau is the main central island where most of the population lives. It's also a great stop to drop in and be able to get boat jobs done. It's got the best grocery stores. It's also got the best connections to anyone who wants to fly in to visit, although you can use the small hopper planes to visit all the little islands as well. So then you've got Eleuthera and Cat Island group, and still we haven't visited Cat, so that gives us another reason to go back on another trip. The Exumas is one of the most well-known and the most southern group of the commonly visited islands. It's one of our favorite destinations. We really quite enjoy it. And that southern terminus down at the south end of the Exumas of Georgetown is one of the real highlights of a Bahamas cruise and becomes a base for many people who come and stay down for the winter down in Georgetown Harbor. So we're going to take a little visit to Georgetown and the base in Exuma Harbor.
During the Second World War, the United States built a seaplane base here in Great Exuma's large harbor. The superb protection of Elizabeth Harbor meant calm waters for landing planes in virtually any conditions. The same protection that cruising sailors appreciate as a calm anchorage in lovely surroundings. After the end of the war, the base was closed again, and now the area is just lightly developed. Stocking Island forms the other side of this 3-mile-long harbor and is a great place to wander and explore.
Any cruise in the Bahamas is going to involve a lot of shallow water piloting. That was something that we didn't have experience with on our first trip down in 1989. We had not been in the shallow waters, and especially the fact that we had learned to navigate where there was always buoys and aids to navigation showing you where to go. Back in the days before GPS, where you could just follow the plotter. But you have to learn how to look at the shallows and try to judge the depths of the water. So in this aerial shot you can see that there's a couple of coral heads. We're on a bank where the water's somewhere between 12 and 15 feet or 18 feet deep. But then the big black marks, in this case there's a couple of coral heads in the picture, and that one closest to us probably only has about 3 feet of water on top of it. And there's a couple of more in this picture as well. So you get pretty good at spotting them, but it's one of the reasons you don't want to be making crossings in the Bahamas over the banks in the dark, because it's very hard to avoid all of these coral heads, and they're not all exactly charted on the plotter either. After Exumas and further out than that, there are what are called the far out islands, or the Family Islands in the Bahamas. And there's a lot of really great stuff in the Family Islands. Quite a few groups. Again, these are a little harder to visit. They have smaller settlements. They have shallower water, most of them, or many of them. And they're a little harder to get into some of them, but there's some really rewarding cruising grounds there. So let's take a look at one of the far out islands, or the Family Islands of Acklins, which is one of our favorite little stops.
Deserted island? Check. Clear blue water? Check. Trade wind breeze in the casuarina trees? Check. 1 mile long beach with perfect sand for running. This sand is the whitest we have seen anywhere, apparently because it is made up mainly of oolite, fine granules that precipitate out of the warm, shallow waters. Most tropical sand is formed of broken up corals that tend to make a coarser, sandy beige color. But the Bahamas and Turks and Caicos have more of this whiter sand, finer than sugar. The Bahamas have some of the most spectacular beaches in the world, and depending on how you count, there are somewhere between 700 or 2,000 islands and small keys. It's pretty easy to find a beach or a whole island to yourself.
The next route south is the Caribbean 1500 route, which heads directly offshore from the east coast of the United States, leaving out of Hampton, Virginia. And it goes directly offshore near Bermuda, basically heads a little bit to the east and then south, and goes straight down to the Caribbean. We've not done this exact route, but it normally would take something like 10 or 11 days maybe to do that trip. Very carefully you have to check the weather to make sure you can safely cross the Gulf Stream and then have reasonable weather for the trip south down to the Caribbean. Another option is to go offshore to the Bahamas. This is better if your boat is a little deeper. So if the boat draws, say, 8 feet, or especially if you have a tall mast, you can't go down the Intracoastal Waterway with a limit of 64 foot of mast height. So in that case, you can do an offshore route. That way you'd leave and go around Cape Hatteras offshore and then go straight down to the Bahamas. We have done that trip with jumps in it, where we hopped along, went around Hatteras into Beaufort, then went down to Jacksonville, and then across to the Bahamas. So 3 jumps. And also from there you can do Bahamas onto the Caribbean directly from the Bahamas. And there's a few advantages to that route. It's not that commonly done to do this, but we have done it 2 times. Once we did it from the Abacos straight out down to Antigua, and we went once from Staniel Key in the Exumas and went straight on down to St. Martin. And I think that one took 6 days. I can't remember, 5 or 6. But it was a nice calm trip. We were in Staniel Key, and the trick with this is you really need to go east first and then go south. If you go just south-southeast, you're going to probably end up into strong headwinds before you get there. But we were down in the Staniel Key area in the Exumas and saw a nice weather forecast and realized that we were going to be able to do that trip. It is a video. You can take a look at that on our channel, and I'll put a link here for that show. We were looking out for some good weather where we would have some light winds followed by north winds. So as a front approaches, you can often have this where the wind is going to come light from the south, southwest, west, northwest, and with all that westerly winds you get and some light air too, you can make zip off to the east. And then when you get into the strong winds that are prevailing out of the east, you've already gone east and you don't need to make any further easting. So the day we left was a fairly nice light wind day, and we knew there would be about 24 hours of light wind. We planned to do that to motor. We should be able to get 150 miles east directly in the first easy day. So we did that. Then the wind came up as it was supposed to from the north and then slightly northeast, but it never got really strong. And this is probably the biggest kind of waves that we saw, with about maybe 1.5 meters. So it's a matter of really keeping a close eye on the weather to make sure that you've got a bit of a window there you can do this. They don't come every time a front comes. Sometimes the fronts are a lot stronger. It could be a lot rougher, and you just have to make a decision just when it gets there and be ready to have the time to jump on the right weather window. And this trip usually happens a few times every winter if you're careful. As I say, the most kind of winds that we had were no more than 15 knots for the whole trip, and close hauled. That was really, it's a very ideal sailing. Then we get a bit south, there's some sargasso weeds. We had a really lovely sail to arrive in the sunset just before Christmas down in St. Martin. The other option, besides all these other routes to get down to the Caribbean from the Bahamas, is to go what's called the Thornless Path, or the Thorny Path as it used to be called, because it does tend to be right on the wind on the nose the whole time. So you've got to watch for every window, as we were doing in the last one, but just sort of making little hops, and you can do that. And hopefully you'll find some decent weather, and then you can use the hop to go another day or so further on, and then hole up there a little bit, and then jump down to the Dominican Republic. There's a bit of a close-up of it. It involves a lot more stops. We haven't done it, but we've met a number of people who have, and have enjoyed the trip. It means you don't have so long overnight passages like what we did with our 5 or 7 day ones. This is the kind of weather you're looking for as the front is approaching here. We've got some light winds, and the wind is coming first from the south, and then it's coming around to the west and then northwest. And with that weather, you've got that light air, you can get started. This is another weather program we try using called Weather 4D, and it's looking at these different options and saying, okay, here's the sort of, as the front comes, we can use that a couple of days. And it calculates your position and your options based on what it knows about your boat's performance. So you have to feed in what's called the polar diagram of your boat, showing that if you're headed at 90 degrees to the wind, and the wind's 15 knots, you tend to be doing 8 knots, for instance. And then it uses all that information to calculate where you're going to make it to, and then tell you what you should do the next day. So this is a simple way to sort of quickly evaluate, as you're sitting there having sundowners one day, look at the weather for the next few days and see what the forecast is going to do if you were to leave on Saturday or on Sunday or perhaps Monday, what sort of winds you'd encounter along the way. The last leg is from the Virgins to St. Martin. So this is the last upwind leg you have to do. And when you get to St. Martin, everything is beam winds sailing on down through the islands. And that's the real Caribbean that everybody shows up for, with these predictable winds that just every day they come out of the east, typically blowing 15 knots, but there's some winds of 20 and whatnot, but you still see the next island right over there, and then you can just sail on to that one, be anchored for the night, and another Caribbean night. But that first place that you're hoping to get to is the Virgin Islands. We have done a number of other videos of those. I'll link a playlist here of some of our other Virgin Islands movies. It is one of our favorite destinations. The Virgins are the secret weapon to win your wife over to sailing, or your husband if he's anxious about going cruising, to win them over to the sailing lifestyle. So let's take a look at the British Virgin Islands. The British Virgin Islands have got to be about the best destination we have ever seen for a tropical sailing vacation. For a week or two charter holiday, these compact sailing grounds have it all. Start with nearly guaranteed trade winds blowing from the east at 10 to 20 knots. The main cruising area is in Sir Francis Drake Channel, where you're sailing in a protected area. Tortola to the north protects from northerly swells, and Virgin Gorda to the east against the Caribbean seas, which could run 6 to 8 feet. Then add in cute tropical islands with nice beaches and very little development.
The islands are close enough that you can have a different anchorage or mooring every night, but not have to sail more than an hour or so to get to them. Perfect if you are hoping to get your family hooked on sailing in a relatively easy environment. And since the whole archipelago is one country, you don't have to worry about clearing customs within the BVI.
Now, if you're going to charter a boat, I would say that one of the best places to charter first, especially, would be the British Virgin Islands. One of the greatest things about the BVI that there are so many islands to visit, and yet you don't have to check in and out every time. So even in this COVID age of all the quarantining and everything, you just fly straight into the British Virgins, do a test, and you're there in the Virgin Islands, and you don't have to check in and out because you've got so many great sailing destinations to visit in the islands. You don't have to go from island to island as you would in the rest of the Caribbean. Probably the second group of islands that I would put after you've done one or two cruises in the BVI and you're looking for something a bit more advanced would be the Grenadines. These islands are a little more spread out. Again, it's all still one island nation. St Vincent and the Grenadines is one group, and you can just check in there and then sail around within those islands. And they're very lovely, a bit further south, so they're a little longer plane ride down, and the islands, once you get there, are a little further apart, so there's a bit more adventurous sailing. Still got friendly people in that beautiful sea. So let's take a look at St. Vincent and the Grenadines. If you would like to sail and experience the real Caribbean, the Grenadines and Grenada might be for you. A bit wilder than the compact and protected British Virgin Islands, the southern Caribbean waters between the Grenadines and her southern neighbours of Carriacou and Grenada will offer a bit more sailing challenge. Passages are a bit longer, and the seas can run big, especially in the vicinity of the channel between Grenada and Carriacou. But then you have the reward of the tiny jewels of the Grenadines, especially our favourites of the Tobago Keys. Look at this gorgeous water! Oh my God, it is beautiful!
There are a few options to explore these islands besides on your own boat. A number of crewed charter boats visit here, as well as some smaller cruise ships, or you can stay ashore on some of the islands, such as this remote bay on Union Island, or the charming Beckway with its bustling and friendly little port.
So thanks everyone for tuning in. Throw a comment below if you have any more questions, and I'll try to answer them down there in the comments section. And if you've already done the cruise, why don't you throw in one of your favorite destinations? Or if you've chartered down there, what would be your best recommendation for people who are going to try it the first time? So give us a thumbs up if you enjoyed it, and subscribe if you're not already subscribed to Distant Shores TV for the ongoing journey. Thanks a lot, and see you next time.